The black car pulled through the palace gates at exactly midnight. No fanfare, no announcements, no press waiting with flashing cameras. Just silence and shadows. Inside the vehicle sat a woman who had been declared missing for 6 months. Her face pale, but determined, clutching a manila envelope that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Princess Catherine had returned, but she wasn't alone. Beside her sat a man whose uniform bore no royal insignia, whose eyes held secrets that could topple crowns, and whose loyalty had been bought not with gold or titles, but with truth. The truth about what really happened the night she disappeared. The truth about who orchestrated it all. The truth about Camilla. As the car stopped before the grand entrance, Catherine's fingers tightened around the envelope. Inside were photographs, recordings, and documents that would prove beyond doubt what she had suspected all along. The queen consort wasn't just guilty of jealousy or political maneuvering. She was guilty of something far worse. Tonight, the princess would reclaim not just her place in the palace, but her right to justice. Tonight, Camilla would face the consequences of her actions. Tonight, everything would change. The palace doors opened, and Catherine stepped into her future, one where she would no longer be the victim of someone else's ambition. The marble floors of Buckingham Palace echoed with Catherine's footsteps as she walked through corridors she had once called home. 6 months ago, these same halls had witnessed her tearful departure after what the world believed was a devastating personal crisis. The official story spoke of exhaustion, of needing time away from royal duties, of a temporary retreat from public life. But Catherine knew the truth was far darker. Detective Inspector Marcus Thompson walked beside her, his weathered face showing years of dealing with cases that never made the headlines. His reputation for discretion had made him invaluable to the Royal Protection Unit. But tonight, he served a different master. Tonight, he served justice. "Your Highness," he said quietly as they approached the main staircase, "are you certain you want to proceed tonight? We could wait until morning, arrange for proper protocols." Catherine stopped and turned to face him. Her green eyes, which had once sparkled with the joy of a new bride entering royal life, now burned with cold determination. "Inspector Thompson, I have been patient for 6 months. I have gathered evidence, built my case, and prepared for this moment. Camilla thinks I'm broken, that I'll never return to challenge her. She's about to learn how wrong she is." The envelope in her hands contained more than just evidence. It contained her salvation, her vindication, and, most importantly, her weapon against the woman who had systematically destroyed her reputation and nearly her sanity. Catherine's mind drifted back to that awful night 6 months ago. She had been returning from a charity event in Manchester, tired but fulfilled after a successful day of engagements. The car accident had seemed so random, so unfortunate. A truck had run a red light, slamming into the side of her vehicle. She had been rushed to the hospital, and during her recovery, strange things began to happen. First, there were the leaked stories about her supposed fragility, her inability to handle royal pressure. Then came the whispered rumors about conflicts with other family members. Anonymous sources quoted in tabloids spoke of her being difficult, demanding, unsuitable for royal life. Each story chipped away at her carefully built reputation. But the final blow came when she discovered the truth about the accident. It hadn't been random at all. Inspector Thompson had been the one to uncover the connection. While investigating what appeared to be an unrelated corruption case involving royal security contracts, he had stumbled upon communications that revealed the truck driver had been paid handsomely for his mistake. The money trail led through several shell companies, but eventually it pointed to accounts controlled by people very close to Camilla. The queen consort believed that removing you would secure her position. Thompson had explained when he first approached Catherine 3 months ago. With you gone, there would be no one to challenge her influence over the king, no one to represent a different vision of what the monarchy could become. Catherine had spent the last 3 months working with Thompson to build an airtight case. They had traced financial records, secured witness testimonies, and, most damning of all, obtained recordings of conversations where Camilla explicitly discussed her plans to discredit Catherine. Now, as they climbed the grand staircase, Catherine felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The palace staff they encountered seemed shocked to see her, their faces showing confusion and concern. Word would spread quickly that she had returned. "Where is she?" Catherine asked Thompson as they reached the first floor. "According to our intelligence, the Queen Consort is in her private study. She's been working late most evenings since you've been away, apparently consolidating her influence over various royal appointments and decisions." They walked through the portrait gallery, where paintings of previous monarchs and consorts looked down upon them. Catherine paused before a portrait of Queen Alexandra, Edward VII's wife, who had famously endured her husband's numerous affairs with dignity and strength. "She survived worse than this," Catherine whispered to herself. "Mom?" Thompson inquired. "Nothing, Inspector. Just reminding myself that strong women have faced challenges in this palace before." As they approached Camilla's study, Catherine could hear voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see Camilla sitting behind an ornate desk, speaking animatedly on the phone. "Yes, the arrangement for next week's state dinner are proceeding perfectly," Camilla was saying. "Without Catherine's constant interference, we can finally present a unified front to our guests." Catherine's jaw tightened. Even in her absence, Camilla couldn't resist taking credit for work Catherine had initiated months earlier. Thompson gestured for Catherine to wait while he positioned himself strategically near the door. The plan was simple but effective. Catherine would enter and confront Camilla directly, while Thompson recorded the conversation. They needed Camilla to incriminate herself further, to add fresh evidence to their already substantial collection. Catherine took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The heavy oak door swung wide, and she stepped into the study with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Good evening, Camilla." The Queen Consort's phone clattered to the desk as she looked up in shock. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the immediate pallor that spread across her face. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Catherine," she finally managed. "My dear, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you back so soon." "I'm sure you weren't," Catherine replied, moving further into the room. The study was exactly as she remembered, filled with antique furniture and the heavy scent of expensive perfume that Camilla favored. "I hope you don't mind a late hour, but I felt we needed to have a conversation." Privately, Camilla's eyes darted around the room, no doubt looking for an escape route or a way to summon assistance. "Of course, dear. Please sit down. Would you like some tea? You look rather pale. Are you quite well?" The false concern in Camilla's voice made Catherine's stomach turn. This was the same woman who had orchestrated her near destruction, now pretending to care about her well-being. "I'm perfectly well, thank you. In fact, I've never been clearer about anything in my life." Catherine remained standing, maintaining her position of authority. "I've spent the last 6 months learning some fascinating things about what happened during my absence." "Oh," Camilla's voice became carefully neutral, but Catherine could see her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her teacup. "Yes, for instance, I learned about the remarkable series of stories that appeared in the press about my supposed instability. Stories that contained details only someone with intimate knowledge of royal protocols could have provided." Camilla set down her teacup with a slight clink. "The press can be quite inventive, Catherine. You know how they love to speculate." "They can indeed," Catherine agreed. "But these weren't speculations, were they? These were carefully planted stories designed to undermine my reputation and make my eventual permanent disappearance seem not only plausible, but perhaps even necessary." The mask of concern was beginning to slip from Camilla's face, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I find your tone rather accusatory." Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm not suggesting anything, Camilla. I am stating facts. Facts that I can prove." She reached into her jacket and withdrew the manila envelope, placing it on the desk between them. Camilla's eyes fixed on it, as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" Camilla asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. Evidence, Catherine said simply. Evidence of your involvement in the campaign to destroy my reputation. Evidence of your coordination with certain members of the press. Evidence of your manipulation of royal appointments and decisions during my absence. And, most importantly, evidence of your involvement in orchestrating the accident that was meant to remove me permanently from royal life. Camilla's face went completely white. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her teacup and sending hot liquid spreading across important-looking documents on her desk. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're clearly still unwell, Catherine. These fantasies, these paranoid delusions, are backed up by financial records, recorded conversations, and witness testimony, Catherine interrupted. Would you like to hear one of the recordings? I think you'll find your own voice quite recognizable. Catherine opened the envelope and withdrew a small digital recorder. She pressed play, and Camilla's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. The accident should have been enough to sideline her permanently, the recorded voice said. But she's proving more resilient than expected. We may need to consider more direct measures to ensure she doesn't return to interfere with our plans. The color drained completely from Camilla's face as her own words condemned her. She sank back in her chair as if the strength had left her legs. Where did you get that? She whispered. From someone who was tired of being used in your schemes, Catherine replied. Someone who decided that loyalty to the crown meant loyalty to justice, not loyalty to your ambitions. Inspector Thompson chose that moment to step into the room, his presence adding official weight to the confrontation. Your Majesty, he said formally to Camilla, I believe we need to have a more detailed conversation about these matters. Camilla looked between Catherine and Thompson, her mind clearly racing as she tried to find a way out of the trap that had closed around her. You can't prove anything, she said finally, but her voice was defeated. These recordings could be faked, manipulated. The financial records could be misinterpreted. Catherine leaned forward, placing her hands on the desk. Could they? All of them? The witness who drove the truck and is willing to testify about who paid him? The palace staff member who was promised a promotion in exchange for passing along my schedule? The journalist who has kept copies of all your instructions about which stories to run and when? With each revelation, Camilla seemed to shrink further into her chair. The powerful woman who had manipulated and schemed her way to influence was crumbling before Catherine's eyes. What do you want? Camilla asked quietly. Catherine straightened up, feeling a sense of power and control she hadn't experienced in months. I want justice. I want the truth to come to light. And I want you to face the consequences of your actions. She turned to Inspector Thompson. I believe we have enough evidence to proceed with formal charges. Thompson nodded gravely. More than enough, Your Highness. Conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, abuse of office. The list is quite extensive. Camilla's hands were shaking now as the full weight of her situation became clear. Please, she whispered, think of what this will do to the monarchy. The scandal, the damage to the institution. Catherine felt no sympathy. You should have considered that before you decided to try to have me killed. The monarchy will survive this, Camilla. It survived worse scandals than you. But your time as queen consort is over. As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, footsteps could be heard in the corridor outside. The king himself appeared in the doorway, his face grave and confused. Catherine, he said, his voice filled with surprise and concern. What's happening here? And, Inspector Thompson, what brings you here at this hour? Catherine turned to face her father-in-law, the man who had unwittingly married the woman who had tried to destroy her. Your Majesty, I'm afraid there are some things about your wife that you need to know. The king's entrance into the study changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Charles stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the Persian carpet. His face showed the confusion of a man who had been awakened by urgent whispers from palace security, told only that his daughter-in-law had returned unexpectedly and was meeting privately with the queen consort and a police inspector. "Catherine, my dear," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "We were told you weren't ready to return. Your doctor suggested you needed more time." His eyes moved from Catherine to the pale, trembling figure of his wife, then to Inspector Thompson standing formally near the window. What exactly is going on here? Catherine felt the weight of the moment. Everything she had worked toward for the past 6 months came down to this conversation. She had evidence, she had witnesses, but she also understood the delicate position the king was in. He was about to learn that the woman he had waited decades to marry, the woman he had defied tradition and public opinion to be with, had orchestrated an assassination attempt against his son's wife. "Your Majesty," Catherine began, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was about to reveal. "I need to tell you some things about my disappearance that you don't know. Things that will be difficult to hear, but things you must know." The king's brow furrowed as he looked more closely at his wife. Camilla hadn't spoken since his arrival, and her obvious distress was becoming more apparent by the moment. Her usually perfect composure had completely cracked, and she sat hunched in her chair like a woman awaiting execution. "Camilla, are you unwell?" Charles asked, moving toward her. "You look terrible." Before Camilla could respond, Catherine spoke up. "She looks guilty, Your Majesty. And she should, because she is." The king stopped mid-step and turned to face Catherine fully. "Guilty of what exactly?" Catherine gestured to Inspector Thompson, who stepped forward with a formal bearing that immediately communicated the seriousness of the situation. "Your Majesty," Thompson said, "I am here in my official capacity to present evidence of serious crimes committed against Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Crimes that were orchestrated by Her Majesty the Queen Consort." The king's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and, finally, a growing awareness that something terrible was about to be revealed. He looked between his wife and Catherine, searching for some explanation that would make sense of the impossible situation. "That's preposterous," he said finally. "Camilla, tell them this is some sort of misunderstanding." Camilla opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Catherine felt a moment of pity for her father-in-law. She was about to shatter his world, destroy his faith in the woman he loved. But the alternative was allowing Camilla to continue her destructive schemes, and Catherine refused to be a victim any longer. "Your Majesty, please sit down," she said gently. "This will be easier if you're seated." Charles looked as if he wanted to refuse, but something in Catherine's tone made him comply. He took the leather chair across from his wife's desk, his hands resting on his knees in a posture that reminded Catherine of a student waiting for bad news from a teacher. "6 months ago," Catherine began, "I was involved in what everyone believed was a traffic accident. A truck ran a red light and struck my car. I was hospitalized, and during my recovery, stories began appearing in the press about my supposed mental instability, my inability to handle royal duties, my conflicts with family members." The king nodded slowly. "Yes, it was a difficult time. We were all concerned about you. The stories weren't random, Your Majesty. They were planted by someone with access to private royal information, someone who knew details about my schedule, my medical condition, my personal relationships. Someone who wanted to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that my permanent disappearance from royal life would seem not only reasonable, but necessary." Charles's eyes flickered to his wife, who still hadn't spoken. "Surely you're not suggesting that, Camilla—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Catherine interrupted. "I'm stating facts backed by evidence." She reached for the envelope on the desk and withdrew several photographs. "These are bank records showing payments made to the driver of the truck that hit my car. The money was transferred through a series of shell companies, but Inspector Thompson was able to trace them back to accounts controlled by associates of the Queen Consort." She placed the photographs on the desk where the king could see them. His face grew pale as he studied the financial documents, the highlighted transfers, the dates that corresponded exactly with her accident. "This proves nothing," Camilla finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Financial records can be manipulated forged. Catherine continued as if Camilla hadn't spoken. We also have testimony from the truck driver himself. He's prepared to swear under oath that he was paid £50,000 to cause what was meant to look like a fatal accident. When I survived, additional payments were made to ensure the media campaign against me would continue. The king's hands were shaking now as he looked at the evidence. This can't be true. There must be some explanation. Catherine pressed the play button on the digital recorder again. Camilla's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The accident should have been enough to sideline her permanently. But she's proving more resilient than expected. We may need to consider more direct measures to ensure she doesn't return to interfere with our plans. The recording continued, capturing Camilla in conversation with an unknown accomplice, discussing ways to ensure Catherine's reputation would be so damaged that her return to royal duties would be impossible. The leaked medical information was particularly effective. Camilla's recorded voice continued. The stories about her supposed breakdown have made her a figure of sympathy rather than respect. No one will take her seriously if she tries to challenge our direction for the monarchy. The king's face had gone completely white. He stared at the recorder as if it were some alien device he couldn't comprehend. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. "Charles," Camilla said softly, speaking his name like a prayer. "Please, let me explain." But the king wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was staring at Catherine with an expression of horror and growing understanding. "My God," he whispered, "what has she done?" Inspector Thompson stepped forward again. "Your Majesty, we have substantial evidence that the Queen Consort orchestrated not only the assassination attempt against the Princess of Wales, but also a comprehensive campaign to destroy her reputation and remove her from royal life. We have financial records, witness testimony, recorded conversations, and documented proof of media manipulation." The king stood up slowly, his movements those of a much older man. He walked to the window and stared out at the palace grounds, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "How long has this been going on?" Catherine and Thompson exchanged a glance. This was the question they had hoped he wouldn't ask, because the answer was even more devastating than the immediate crimes. "The planning appears to have begun shortly after William and Catherine's engagement," Thompson said carefully. "The Queen Consort viewed the Princess of Wales as a threat to her own influence and position within the royal family." 5 years, the king said quietly. "She's been planning this for 5 years. Camilla finally found her voice again. "Charles, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Catherine was changing everything, modernizing traditions that had stood for centuries. She was making me look outdated, irrelevant. The public preferred her to me. The press followed her instead of focusing on our work. So you tried to have her killed?" The king's voice was like ice as he turned back to face his wife. "Because you were jealous of the attention she received?" "It wasn't supposed to be fatal," Camilla said desperately. "Just serious enough to require a long recovery, time away from duties." "I never intended." "The truck driver was paid to cause a fatal accident," Catherine interrupted. "The only reason I survived was because my protection officer managed to pull me from the wreckage before the car exploded. Your wife wanted me dead, Your Majesty. Everything else is just an attempt to minimize her guilt now that she's been caught." The king looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he had loved for decades. The woman he had waited to marry until duty allowed. The woman he had thought understood the responsibilities and dignity required of royal life was revealed as someone capable of murder and treachery. "How many others know about this?" he asked Thompson. "At present, just those in this room and the investigative team. We've kept the circle small to protect the integrity of the evidence and to give Your Majesty the opportunity to address this internally before any public disclosure becomes necessary." Catherine watched the king process this information. She could see him weighing options, considering the implications for the monarchy, for his reign, for the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. "What evidence do you have beyond the financial records and recordings?" he asked. Thompson opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Witness statements from 5 palace staff members who were coerced into providing information about the Princess of Wales's schedule and activities. Email communications between the Queen Consort and several tabloid journalists, detailing exactly which stories to publish and when. Phone records showing calls between the Queen Consort and the truck driver on the day before the accident. And security footage from 3 different locations showing meetings between the Queen Consort and individuals who later played roles in the conspiracy. Each piece of evidence seemed to hit the king like a physical blow. He aged years in the space of minutes, the weight of betrayal and scandal settling on his shoulders like a royal robe made of lead. "There's more," Catherine said quietly. The investigation revealed that this wasn't her first attempt to remove perceived threats to her position. There were similar campaigns against other family members who were seen as too popular or influential. She gestured to Thompson, who produced another set of documents. Princess Anne's riding accident 3 years ago, which conveniently occurred just before she was about to publish memoirs that would have been highly critical of certain family members. Prince Edward's son's problems at university, which began after anonymous tips to the press about his supposed wild behavior. Even some of the negative coverage around Prince Andrew's scandals were amplified by information provided through channels connected to the Queen Consort. The king's legs seemed to give out, and he sank back into his chair. The scope of his wife's actions was becoming clear, and it painted a picture of systematic manipulation and destruction spanning years. "She's been conducting a shadow campaign against her own family," he whispered. "Against anyone she perceived as a threat to her position," Catherine corrected. "The difference is that with me, she went from character assassination to attempted actual assassination." Camilla had been listening to this catalog of her crimes with growing panic. Now she stood up suddenly, pointing an accusatory finger at Catherine. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" she hissed. "You think you understand what it's like to be constantly compared to a dead woman, to know that no matter what you do, you'll never measure up to the people's memory of Diana?" The mention of William's mother brought a sharp intake of breath from everyone in the room. Catherine felt anger flare within her, but she controlled it. "So you decided to make sure I ended up dead like her?" Catherine asked. "Is that your solution to feeling inadequate?" "I never meant for it to go that far," Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The evidence suggests otherwise," Thompson interjected. "The truck driver was specifically instructed to ensure the crash would be fatal. When the princess survived, there were discussions about arranging another accident during her hospital stay." The king's face had gone beyond pale to a grayish color that suggested he might be physically ill. He stood up again, this time with visible effort. "Camilla," he said, his voice barely controlled, "I need you to tell me the absolute truth. Did you order Catherine's death?" For a moment, Camilla seemed to consider lying again. Then, her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Yes," she whispered. "But, Charles, you have to understand, I don't have to understand anything," the king said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position. "You attempted to murder my daughter-in-law. You have systematically worked to destroy members of my family. You have betrayed everything the crown stands for." He turned to Inspector Thompson. "What are our options here?" Inspector Thompson straightened his shoulders, understanding that he was now addressing not just a concerned family member, but the sovereign himself. The weight of constitutional protocol and criminal law intersected in this moment, creating a situation that had no precedent in modern royal history. "Your Majesty," Thompson began carefully, "we are dealing with serious criminal charges that cannot be ignored or handled purely within the family. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of public office are matters that fall under the jurisdiction of the Crown Prosecution Service. However, given the unique circumstances and the persons involved, there may be some discretion in how we proceed." The king walked to his wife's desk and picked up one of the photographs showing the financial transfers. He studied it for a long moment, as if hoping the numbers might change or disappear entirely. "What would normally happen in a case like this?" he asked. "Immediate arrest, formal charges filed within 24 hours, and a public trial," Thompson replied. The evidence we have is more than sufficient for conviction on multiple felony counts. The queen consort would face significant prison time. Camilla made a sound that was part sob, part gasp. She had sunk back in her chair and seemed to be shrinking before their eyes. The powerful, manipulative woman who had orchestrated years of schemes now looked like nothing more than a frightened elderly lady facing the consequences of her actions. Catherine watched this transformation without sympathy. She had spent 6 months in hiding, 6 months allowing the world to believe she was mentally unstable, 6 months building her case while Camilla continued to enjoy the privileges and power of her position. The fear Camilla was showing now was nothing compared to what Catherine had felt lying in that hospital bed, realizing that someone had tried to kill her. What about the constitutional implications? The king asked. A queen consort facing criminal charges, potentially imprisoned. What would that mean for the monarchy? Thompson glanced at Catherine before responding. Your Majesty, that's not really my area of expertise. My role is to ensure that justice is served and that the law is applied equally, regardless of position or title. However, I understand that the Princess of Wales has given considerable thought to these concerns. All eyes turned to Catherine. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment when she would present not just evidence of crimes, but a solution that would serve both justice and the stability of the crown. Your Majesty, she said, I've spent the last 6 months not only gathering evidence, but also considering what outcome would best serve the country and the monarchy. A public trial would be devastating, not just for Camilla, but for the entire institution. The details of her crimes would dominate headlines for months, possibly years. Every state function, every royal engagement would be overshadowed by the scandal. The king nodded slowly. What are you proposing? Catherine opened her envelope and withdrew another document. A comprehensive confession from the queen consort, acknowledging all of her crimes and accepting full responsibility. Her immediate abdication from all royal duties and titles. Her permanent exile from the United Kingdom. And a substantial financial settlement to compensate the victims of her schemes. She placed the confession on the desk. It was several pages long, meticulously detailing each crime and scheme Camilla had orchestrated. In exchange, Catherine continued, the criminal charges would be filed but sealed, to be opened only if she ever attempts to return to the UK or violates any conditions of her exile. The public would be told that she is stepping down due to health concerns. Camilla looked up from her chair, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. You would do that? Allow me to avoid prison. Catherine's expression remained cold. I would do that for the monarchy, not for you. The crown is bigger than any individual, including you. But make no mistake, this is not mercy. This is a life sentence of exile and disgrace just served outside prison walls. The king read through the confession carefully, his face growing more grave with each paragraph. When he finished, he looked at his wife with an expression that was equal parts heartbreak and revulsion. This document outlines 5 years of systematic betrayal, he said quietly. 5 years of lies, manipulation, and conspiracy. How could you do this to our family? How could you do this to me? Camilla's facade finally crumbled completely. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her husband. I was terrified of losing you, she said. When Catherine came into the family, she was everything I wasn't. Young, beautiful, popular with the people. I watched how the press fawned over her, how the public loved her. I knew that eventually you would see her as I did, as everything a royal woman should be. So you tried to kill her, the king said flatly. I never meant for it to go that far, Camilla insisted. It was supposed to be an accident that would sideline her for a year or two, give me time to solidify my position. When she survived, I panicked. The others involved started pushing for more extreme measures. I should have stopped it then, but I was in too deep. Catherine felt a surge of anger at Camilla's attempt to minimize her role. You personally approved every step of the campaign against me. You reviewed the media stories before they were published. You authorized the payments to the truck driver. You discussed additional attempts on my life. Don't insult our intelligence by pretending you were a passive participant. Inspector Thompson had been quietly observing the family dynamics, but now he stepped forward again. Your Majesty, I need to inform you that there are time constraints we're working under. Other individuals involved in this conspiracy have been detained for questioning. If the Queen Consort doesn't make a decision about how to proceed, the standard legal processes will take over automatically. The king understood the implication. They had a narrow window to handle this internally before it became a public criminal matter with all the constitutional chaos that would follow. Camilla, he said, turning to his wife with an expression of finality. You have two choices. You can sign this confession, accept exile, and spend the rest of your life in disgrace but freedom. Or you can face public trial, conviction, and imprisonment while destroying the monarchy in the process. Camilla looked around the room desperately, as if searching for some alternative that didn't exist. Her eyes lingered on Catherine, and, for a moment, Catherine thought she might try to make one final appeal for sympathy. Please, Camilla said quietly, think of what this will do to Charles. He doesn't deserve to have his reign overshadowed by this scandal. Catherine felt no satisfaction in her response, only cold justice. You should have thought of that before you tried to have me murdered. Your choices created this situation. Now you have to live with the consequences. The king walked to the window again, staring out at the grounds where he had played as a child, where he had learned about duty and service, where he had prepared his entire life to serve his country. When he turned back, his decision was clear. Sign the confession, Camilla. It's over. Camilla's hand shook as she reached for the pen Catherine offered her. The document was comprehensive, admitting to attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, abuse of office, and systematic campaigns against multiple family members. Her signature would end her life as queen consort and condemn her to permanent exile. Where will I go? She asked as she signed each page. That's not our concern, Catherine replied. You'll have 48 hours to arrange your departure. You may take personal belongings, but no items that belong to the crown. All royal titles and privileges are permanently revoked. As Camilla finished signing the last page, Inspector Thompson gathered the documents and placed them in his briefcase. The confession would be filed with the appropriate authorities, the sealed criminal charges would be prepared, and the most serious crisis in modern royal history would be contained. The king looked at his wife of just 3 years, the woman he had waited decades to marry. I need you to leave now, Camilla. I can't bear to look at you anymore. Camilla stood slowly, her movements those of a much older woman than she had appeared just hours earlier. She paused at the door, looking back at her husband one last time. I did love you, Charles, she said softly. The king's response was barely audible. Love doesn't try to murder family members. After Camilla left the room, silence descended on the remaining 3 people. The enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. The queen consort, the woman who had stood beside the king at his coronation less than 3 years earlier, was now a confessed attempted murderer heading into permanent exile. Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that justice had been served. Satisfaction that Camilla would face consequences for her actions. But also a deep sadness for the king, who had lost not just his wife, but his faith in someone he had loved for most of his adult life. Your Majesty, she said gently, I'm sorry it had to happen this way. The king aged years in that moment. When he looked at Catherine, his eyes were filled with pain and gratitude in equal measure. You could have destroyed us all, he said quietly. A public trial, criminal convictions, constitutional crisis. You had every right to demand full justice, regardless of the consequences to the monarchy. Catherine nodded. I considered it. But despite everything Camilla did, I still believe in what the crown represents. I believe in the institution, even when individuals fail it. Inspector Thompson prepared to leave, his briefcase containing enough evidence to topple governments. Your Majesty, the Princess of Wales, I'll need to brief my superiors and begin the process of coordinating the Queen Consort's departure. The official story will need to be prepared carefully. After Thompson left, Catherine and the king were alone in the study. The room that had been the center of Camilla's power now felt empty and cold. The expensive furniture and royal portraits seemed to mock the betrayal that had been exposed there. "What happens now?" the king asked. Catherine had been thinking about this moment for months. "Now you focus on being the king this country needs. You move forward without the shadow of Camilla's schemes. And you trust that the monarchy is strong enough to survive this crisis, just as it has survived others." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "And now I return to my duties as Princess of Wales, with the knowledge that I can serve without fear of assassination or sabotage." The king nodded slowly. "The family owes you an enormous debt, Catherine. You protected not just yourself, but all of us." As Catherine prepared to leave the study, she turned back to the man who would now face the difficult task of rebuilding his reign and his faith in those around him. "Your Majesty, Camilla was wrong about one thing. You don't need to worry about being compared to Queen Diana. You need to worry about being the best king you can be. That's what the country needs, and it's what the crown deserves." As she walked through the palace corridors toward her own apartments, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a victim. Tonight, she had become something else entirely. She had become the woman who saved the monarchy from its greatest internal threat in modern history. But her work was far from over. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin, helping to rebuild the royal family's reputation and ensuring that nothing like Camilla's reign of terror could ever happen again. The next morning brought an unusual quiet to Buckingham Palace. Word had spread among the staff that something significant had occurred during the night, but the details remained locked behind closed doors and sealed lips. Catherine stood at the window of her private study, watching the morning shift change of the palace guards, their red uniforms bright against the gray London sky. She had slept little after the confrontation with Camilla, her mind racing through the implications of what would come next. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the aftermath would require careful orchestration. The monarchy couldn't simply pretend that its queen consort had vanished without explanation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Private Secretary Marcus Pemberton entered, carrying the morning newspapers and a concerned expression. He had served the royal family for over 20 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this. "Your Royal Highness," he said formally, "the king has requested an emergency meeting of senior staff and family members at 10 o'clock. He indicated that you would brief us on the situation regarding Her Majesty, the Queen Consort." Catherine turned from the window and accepted the newspapers. The headlines were routine: coverage of upcoming state visits, commentary on recent parliamentary debates, speculation about spring royal engagements. None of them suspected that, by evening, the royal family would be fundamentally different. "Has there been any word about Camilla's whereabouts?" Catherine asked. Pemberton's expression suggested he was trying to process information that didn't quite make sense. Her Majesty's personal staff reported that she was packing personal belongings early this morning and mentioned something about an extended health retreat. Her protection officers have been dismissed, effective immediately. Catherine nodded. Camilla was following the script exactly as agreed. Within 48 hours, she would be gone from British soil forever, her royal life ending not with fanfare, but with a whimper. The morning meeting took place in the private dining room traditionally used for family gatherings. Present were the King, Prince William, Princess and Prince Edward, and key staff members including the private secretary, the press secretary, and the head of royal protection. The absence of Camilla was immediately noticeable. The king looked as though he had aged a decade overnight. His usually perfect posture seemed slightly stooped, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night wrestling with betrayal and heartbreak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for official business, "I've called this meeting to inform you of significant changes that will affect the royal family and our operations going forward." Catherine watched the faces around the table. These people had dedicated their careers to serving the crown, and they deserved to know enough truth to do their jobs effectively, even if they couldn't know everything. The Queen Consort has decided to step down from all royal duties, effective immediately, Due to health concerns that require her full attention, the king continued. She will be leaving the United Kingdom to seek treatment at a private facility abroad. Prince William's expression showed immediate concern. Father, is she seriously ill? Should Catherine and I postpone our upcoming engagements to support the family during this time? The king glanced at Catherine, who had prepared for this moment. The queen consort's condition requires complete rest and isolation from public duties. The best support we can provide is to continue serving the country without interruption. Princess and ever practical asked the question everyone was thinking. How long are we talking about? Weeks? Months? Or should we prepare for permanent changes to royal arrangements? Another glance between the king and Catherine. We should prepare for permanent changes, the king said quietly. The press secretary, Jonathan Hartwell, immediately understood the magnitude of what he was hearing. A queen consort stepping down permanently due to health issues would generate enormous media speculation and potentially destabilize public confidence in the monarchy. Your Majesty, the press will demand details about the health condition, the treatment facility, the timeline for any possible return. They'll want medical statements, expert opinions, updates on her progress. Catherine had anticipated this challenge. Mr. Hartwell, the Queen Consort's medical information is private, as it would be for any individual. We can confirm that she has chosen to focus entirely on her health and will not be resuming royal duties. Any further details would violate medical privacy expectations. Hartwell nodded slowly, understanding that he was being given a framework that would deflect detailed questioning while providing enough information to prevent wild speculation. The head of Royal Protection, Commander Sarah Mitchell, raised a practical concern. Your Majesty, what are the security arrangements for the Queen Consort's departure and ongoing protection? The Queen Consort has declined ongoing protection services, the king replied. She wishes to maintain complete privacy during her treatment. This was technically true, though it omitted the crucial detail that Camilla's exile meant she was no longer entitled to royal protection and had been advised that any attempt to return to the UK would result in immediate arrest. Prince Edward, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Father, forgive me for being direct, but this seems very sudden. Yesterday, Camilla seemed fine, engaged with her normal duties. Today, she's permanently stepping down for health reasons. The family is going to have questions. Catherine felt the king's discomfort with the deception required to protect the monarchy. Charles was fundamentally an honest man who had spent his life in service to duty and truth. Having to mislead his own family went against every instinct he possessed. Edward, Catherine interjected. Sometimes health crises develop more quickly than we expect. The Queen Consort made this decision after careful consultation with her medical team and significant reflection on her priorities. It was a carefully constructed response that contained no technical lies while conveying nothing of the real truth. The meeting continued for another hour, covering the practical arrangements for redistributing Camilla's royal duties, adjusting the calendar for upcoming events, and preparing talking points for staff who would inevitably face questions from friends, family, and media contacts. After the others left, William remained behind with his father and Catherine. As the heir to the throne, he needed to understand more about the situation than could be shared in a general meeting. All right, he said once they were alone, what really happened? Catherine had dreaded this moment. William deserved to know the truth, but she also knew how devastating it would be for him to learn that his stepmother had tried to have his wife murdered. William, she began carefully, the situation is more complex than we can explain publicly. Camilla made some very serious mistakes in judgment that could have damaged the monarchy if they became public. The king and I agreed that her stepping down was the best solution for everyone involved. William's expression sharpened. He had inherited his grandmother's instincts for reading between the lines, and Catherine's diplomatic language wasn't fooling him. What kind of mistakes in judgment? And why are you the one explaining this instead of Camilla herself? The king finally spoke, his voice heavy with pain. Son, there are some things that are better left unexplained. Trust me when I tell you that this decision was necessary and just. William looked between his father and wife, both of whom were clearly keeping significant information from him. This is about Catherine's accident, isn't it? And her time away from royal duties. Catherine's silence was answer enough for William. His face went through a series of expressions as he began to piece together implications too terrible to fully articulate. "My God," he whispered. "She tried to hurt you." Catherine reached for his hand. "William, it's over. She's gone, and she can never hurt anyone in this family again. That's what matters now." But William was beyond diplomatic explanations. He stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "She tried to hurt my wife, and you're letting her walk away to some comfortable exile instead of facing justice?" The king's voice carried the full weight of royal authority when he responded. "William, the decisions made were in the best interests of the crown and the country. Personal feelings, no matter how justified, cannot take precedence over the stability of the monarchy." "The stability of the monarchy?" William's voice rose. "What about justice? What about protecting the people we're supposed to serve? If Camilla can attempt to harm Catherine and face no real consequences, what message does that send?" Catherine stood and placed a hand on her husband's arm. "The consequences are real, William. She's lost everything: her title, her position, her home, her family. She'll spend the rest of her life in exile, knowing that she destroyed her own future through her choices. That may not feel like enough punishment, but it serves justice while protecting the institution we've all sworn to serve." William's anger was slowly giving way to a deeper understanding of the impossible position his family faced. As the future king, he was beginning to grasp the terrible balancing act between personal justice and public duty. "How do I continue working alongside people who knew about this and said nothing?" he asked. "How do I trust anyone in this system again?" It was the question Catherine had been asking herself for 6 months. "You trust carefully," she said. "You surround yourself with people who have proven their loyalty not to individuals, but to the principles the crown represents. And you work to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again." The king added, "And you remember that the monarchy has survived worse betrayals than this. It survived because people like you and Catherine chose duty over personal satisfaction, chose the long-term health of the institution over short-term emotional justice." Over the following days, the palace machinery swung into action to manage Camilla's departure and the public narrative surrounding it. Medical privacy laws provided perfect cover for the lack of specific details about her condition. The Queen Consort's office issued a brief statement thanking the public for their support and requesting privacy during a difficult time. Catherine found herself taking on many of the duties Camilla had previously handled. Charitable patronages needed to be reassigned, state dinner preparations required supervision, and the complex web of royal social obligations had to be maintained without interruption. It was during this period that Catherine discovered the full extent of Camilla's influence and manipulation. Files in her former office revealed years of correspondence with media outlets, detailed plans for undermining other family members' public standings, and evidence of financial improprieties that went far beyond what Inspector Thompson had originally uncovered. One particularly disturbing discovery was a series of documents outlining what Camilla had called succession management, plans to ensure that if anything happened to William, her influence over the king would position her to guide the monarchy's future direction in ways that would benefit her personally. Catherine brought these documents to the king's attention during one of their daily briefings about the transition. She wasn't just eliminating perceived threats, Catherine explained as they reviewed the files together. She was positioning herself to control the entire future of the monarchy. The king read through the documents with growing horror. "She was planning to outlast all of us," he said quietly. "She thought that if she could survive long enough, she would become the power behind the throne for generations." The scope of Camilla's ambition was breathtaking in its audacity and terrifying in its implications. She hadn't just wanted to be queen consort. She had wanted to be the secret ruler of the United Kingdom, using the crown as her personal instrument of power. "Your Majesty," Catherine said carefully. "These documents suggest that there may be other conspirators we haven't identified yet. People who were promised positions or benefits in exchange for their cooperation with her plans." The king nodded grimly. "I'll have Inspector Thompson expand his investigation. We need to be certain that we've rooted out all of Camilla's collaborators." As they worked through the files, Catherine began to understand something she hadn't fully grasped during the immediate crisis. She hadn't just prevented an assassination attempt or exposed a conspiracy. She had prevented a complete subversion of the British monarchy, turning it from an institution of service into an instrument of personal power and ambition. The realization was both empowering and sobering. She had quite literally saved the crown from internal destruction, but the responsibility of that knowledge would stay with her forever. 3 weeks after Camilla's departure, Catherine stood once again at her study window, watching the palace guards change shift. But this time, the view held different meaning. These men and women serve an institution that was now safer, more secure, and free from the shadow of internal betrayal that had threatened to destroy it. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "Proud of you. Proud of us. Ready to serve." Catherine smiled for the first time in months. The worst was over. The real work of rebuilding and moving forward could now begin. 2 months had passed since that pivotal night in Camilla's study, and the monarchy had begun to settle into its new reality. The public had largely accepted the official explanation of the Queen Consort's indefinite absence for health reasons, though speculation continued in certain corners of the media. Catherine had returned to full royal duties with a confidence and authority that hadn't gone unnoticed by those who worked closely with the family. On this particular morning, Catherine was reviewing correspondence in her private office when her secretary announced that Inspector Thompson had arrived for their scheduled meeting. Since Camilla's departure, Thompson had been working quietly to identify and address the remaining elements of her conspiracy network. "Inspector," Catherine greeted him as he entered, carrying his ever-present briefcase. "What updates do you have for me?" Thompson's expression was serious, but satisfied. "Your Royal Highness, we've successfully identified and dealt with the last of the Queen Consort's collaborators. The palace staff member who was passing information about your schedule has been quietly dismissed. The journalist who was coordinating media stories has been transferred to a different beat at her publication, with her editors receiving enough information to ensure she never covers royal matters again." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a final report. "More importantly, we've traced all the financial irregularities and recovered most of the funds that were misappropriated for the conspiracy. The money will be returned to the appropriate royal accounts." Catherine reviewed the report, noting the thoroughness of Thompson's work. "What about the international aspects? Were you able to confirm that Camilla has settled permanently abroad?" "She's currently living in a small villa in southern France," Thompson confirmed. "No staff, no luxury, just a quiet existence under constant but discreet surveillance by French authorities, who are cooperating with our request to monitor her activities. She's made no attempt to contact British media or return to the UK." The image of Camilla living in exile, stripped of all the power and privilege she had once commanded, provided Catherine with a sense of closure. Justice had been served, even if it wasn't the public justice that many might have preferred. And the sealed criminal charges? Filed and secured. If she ever attempts to return to British soil or violates any conditions of her exile, she'll be arrested immediately. The evidence is comprehensive and damning. She knows this, which is why she's made no attempts to challenge her situation. Thompson closed his briefcase and prepared to leave. "Your Royal Highness, if I may say so, the way you handled this entire situation was remarkable. You could have destroyed the monarchy to get your revenge, but instead you chose to protect it. That takes extraordinary character." After Thompson left, Catherine reflected on his words. Revenge had indeed been her initial motivation, the desire to make Camilla pay for her crimes and betrayal. But somewhere in the process, revenge had transformed into something more noble, justice tempered by responsibility, personal vindication balanced with institutional protection. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of King Charles, who had requested a private meeting to discuss the future direction of royal duties now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Catherine," he said as he settled into the chair across from her desk, "I've been thinking about how to reorganize our responsibilities going forward. With Camilla gone, there are significant gaps in our coverage of important causes and institutions." Catherine had been anticipating this conversation. "Your Majesty, I've prepared some recommendations for redistributing the Queen Consort's former patronages and duties." She handed him a detailed proposal she had been working on for weeks. The king reviewed her suggestions, noting how thoughtfully she had matched various charitable organizations and social causes with different family members based on their interests and expertise. "You've given this considerable thought," he observed. "But I notice you've assigned yourself a significantly heavier workload than you carried before." Catherine nodded. "I believe I can handle additional responsibilities now that I don't have to worry about sabotage or interference. More importantly, I want to use this opportunity to strengthen the monarchy's connection with the British people." She pulled out another document, this one outlining her vision for expanding royal engagement with contemporary issues. The monarchy needs to be seen as relevant and responsive to modern challenges. Environmental protection, mental health advocacy, educational opportunity, support for working families. These are the issues that matter to people today. The king studied her proposals with growing interest. Catherine's ideas were bold but practical, modern but respectful of tradition. "You're talking about significant changes to how we operate." "I'm talking about evolution, not revolution," Catherine clarified. "The monarchy has always adapted to serve the needs of its time. Right now, people need to see that their royal family understands and cares about their real concerns." Over the following hour, they discussed specific initiatives Catherine wanted to launch. A mental health program that would provide resources for families dealing with trauma and crisis. An environmental foundation that would work directly with communities to implement practical conservation measures. An education trust that would create opportunities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Each of these initiatives would be funded through private donations and partnerships with existing organizations, Catherine explained. "We wouldn't be creating new bureaucracies or asking for additional public funding. We'd be using the platform of the monarchy to amplify work that's already being done by dedicated people across the country." The king was impressed by the scope and practicality of her vision. "You've clearly been thinking about this for some time." 6 months of forced absence gave me plenty of time to think," Catherine said with a slight smile. "I realized that the best response to Camilla's attempt to destroy my role in the monarchy was to make that role so valuable and effective that it could never be threatened again." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Prince William entered, looking energized and purposeful in a way Catherine hadn't seen since before her accident. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I wanted to update you both on the arrangements for next week's state visit. The schedule has been finalized, and I think you'll be pleased with how we've incorporated some of Catherine's new initiatives into the program." Catherine felt a surge of satisfaction. William's enthusiastic support for her expanded role meant that they could work together as a team in ways that hadn't been possible when Camilla's schemes were creating constant tension and uncertainty. "What specific elements are you including?" the king asked. William consulted his notes. "We're arranging for the visiting dignitaries to tour one of the mental health facilities Catherine has been developing partnerships with. There's also a reception for environmental innovators working on projects that align with her conservation foundation. And we're scheduling a visit to the education center that will be piloting her youth opportunity program." The king nodded approvingly. "Excellent. It demonstrates that our royal functions serve broader purposes beyond ceremony and tradition." After William left to continue his preparations, the king returned his attention to Catherine. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Something more personal." Catherine waited, sensing that this conversation was moving into more sensitive territory. "I've been thinking about the toll these past months have taken on you," the king continued. "You've shown remarkable strength and grace throughout this ordeal, but I know it's changed you. I want to make sure you're getting the support you need to process what you've experienced. Catherine appreciated his concern. Your Majesty, I won't pretend that discovering your stepmother tried to have you murdered is something you simply get over. But I've been working with a counselor who specializes in trauma recovery, and I'm finding healthy ways to channel my experiences into positive action. I'm glad to hear that, the king said. But I also want you to know that if you ever need time away from royal duties to focus on your well-being, that option is always available. The monarchy nearly lost you once. I won't risk that happening again through overwork or neglect of your personal needs. Catherine was moved by his genuine care, especially knowing how difficult the past months had been for him as well. Learning that his wife of decades had been capable of such betrayal had shaken his faith in his own judgment and left him questioning relationships he had taken for granted. Actually, Your Majesty, I find that staying busy with meaningful work is the best therapy for me right now. The new initiatives give me a sense of purpose that helps me move forward rather than dwelling on what Camilla tried to do. Their meeting concluded with plans to announce Catherine's expanded role and new initiatives at an upcoming press conference. The story of her return to full royal duties would focus on positive developments rather than the mysterious circumstances of her previous absence. That evening, Catherine and William walked together through the palace gardens, discussing the changes that had transformed their lives over the past months. The setting sun cast long shadows across the carefully maintained lawns and flower beds that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't uncovered Camilla's conspiracy? William asked as they paused beside a fountain that had been a wedding gift from Queen Victoria. Catherine considered the question. I think she would have eventually succeeded in destroying me, and then moved on to eliminate other perceived threats to her power. She wasn't going to stop with one successful assassination. In the monarchy would have become something very different, an institution serving one woman's ambition rather than the British people's needs. Catherine sat on the edge of the fountain, trailing her fingers in the cool water. In a strange way, her attempt to destroy me may have saved the crown from a much worse fate. William joined her on the fountain's edge. You know what I've realized through all of this? The monarchy isn't just about tradition or ceremony. It's about the character of the people who serve in it. Camilla's character nearly destroyed everything our family has worked to build. Your character saved it. Catherine felt a deep satisfaction at his words, but also a sense of responsibility for the future. We saved it this time, but there will be other challenges, other threats to what we're trying to accomplish. We have to stay vigilant. We will, William assured her, and we'll face them together. As they walked back toward the palace, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a victim of someone else's ambition and cruelty. Tonight, she was a stronger, more determined person who had not only survived betrayal, but had used the experience to become a more effective servant of the crown and the country. The palace lights were beginning to come on as evening settled over London. Inside those walls, the work of monarchy continued, the endless tasks of service, duty, and responsibility that defined royal life. But now that work proceeded without the shadow of internal betrayal, without the constant threat of sabotage and manipulation. Catherine had indeed gotten her revenge against Camilla, but it wasn't the personal, emotional revenge she had initially sought. Instead, it was something far more meaningful. The revenge of proving that good character and dedication to service would ultimately triumph over selfish ambition and cruel manipulation. As she and William entered the palace together, Catherine knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve. But she also knew that she faced that future with strength, wisdom, and the unshakable knowledge that she had not only survived her greatest test, but had emerged from it as a more capable and confident leader. The story of Kate's revenge was complete, but her story as a transformative force within the British monarchy was just beginning. The woman who had once been nearly destroyed by internal conspiracy had become the person most responsible for ensuring that such betrayal could never threaten the crown again. In the end, perhaps that was the most perfect revenge of all. Not just surviving, but using the experience of survival to become irreplaceable.